Yep. Evening, everyone. We're now going to start our subcommittee meeting on conference. The motion for this agenda, the conference call, is to discuss the home rule petition introduced by Councilor Avellaneda, an act authorizing the creation of linkage fees for development in the city of Chelsea, and also an amendment introduced by Councilor Avellaneda regarding the adoption of Article 12 in Chapter 14, titled Linkage Fees for Development. Copy of the ordinance is provided, and also a copy of the home rule petition. Members invited, or rather people invited to attend the subcommittee meeting, is the honorable members of the City Council, City Manager Tom Ambrosino, City Solicitor Cheryl Watson, and members of the public. So this time I'll let the clerk call off the roll.
Councilor Recupero. Councilor Teneri Garcia. Councilor Robinson. Here. Councilor Taylor. Here. Councilor Lopez.
Here.
Councilor Vega Maldonado. Councilor Avellaneda.
Here.
Councilor Brown. Here. Councilor Vido. Councilor De Jesus.
Present.
And Councilor Judah Garcia. You have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So let me just begin so I can brief my colleagues. For those of you who are not familiar or remember this topic matter, we have two items on our agenda for tonight: a home rule petition and similarly a copy of an ordinance that will be passed. The ordinance that is going to be introduced needs to be ratified by the state legislature in order for it to go in. Hence, why in this particular case, a zoning change or an ordinance change, mind you, does need to be accompanied by a home rule petition. Later on tonight, we will be voting on the home rule petition. We will be laying on the table the corresponding ordinance zoning change until such time that the home rule petition passes, at that which time, once the state does allow us the authority to pass or adopt this ordinance, we can then bring it back in front. But the history of this was an introduction of something that I have brought up during last year's charter review, and it meant to try to address the lack of procedure and public debate or process transparency when it comes to mitigation in our community. And the introduction or the attempt to ask the Charter Review Committee to do so stated that it was not something that could be done through the charter process. I then later on, towards the end of last year, come fall, introduced a ordinance that would adopt the ability for the City Council to have the City Manager present to the City Council prior to any special permit being issued a mitigation package, if you would. And if the mitigation package was approved by the City Council, therefore that special permit can then go to the zoning board and be approved, because the zoning board in it itself does not have the power nor procedure in place to negotiate mitigation. Has mitigation happened in our community in the past? Absolutely. There have been different ways that developers have offered concessions and so forth on a development. In some cases, it's, for example, Eastern Salt, when it expanded on Marginal Street, it offered years ago to pay for the new artificial field, or an artificial field, replace the grass field at Highland Park. We had a hotel development in the Upper Broadway area offer mitigation, and they paid towards a pathway around the back and also a donation to a local nonprofit. We've had, and similarly, so some developers, if it's housing, offer to go above and beyond the 15% inclusionary zoning and go into 20%. So there is mitigation. The question, or rather the issue that I was trying to address was there was no procedure in place for how mitigation is done. It is simply done out of the public debate and done between city officials, whether it be the city manager and the director of permitting and planning, but no input, indirect input from, say, the city council. In result of this conversation and result of my introduction of a special permit that was deemed untenable and unconstitutional by our city solicitor, the city manager presented his alternative. His alternative was that we adopt a linkage fee, which is mitigation in the eyes of some. We charge a certain rate by the size of the project in itself, and then determine how to use that money later on. Now, the only existing litigation or the linkage fee that is on the books right now that I could think of or I saw was Medford. And Medford has it in its books, but they specifically only use it for open space, new parks. The model that I was trying to adopt here was Boston's. And Boston, when a project is filed for permitting, and if it reaches a certain size, it triggers the creation of a local neighborhood mitigation group who then negotiates this. Now, City of Chelsea doesn't have 11 neighborhoods, doesn't need another committee that we have to create every time something like this happens, but they do use a sort of rate the same way, and then the amount that they negotiate, that group, the Boston Planning Department, then distributes the monies to groups in that neighborhood to that would be beneficiaries of the mitigation. Now, I presented in front of you several packets or information. You will see the Boston Planning and Development Agency distribution. Last year, it gave out nearly $31 million worth of benefits. You'll see the topics. I also allowed you to see the article from the East Boston Times. This one was presented just this past February 27th, and it tells you how the Boston Planning Development Agency approved 49,000 distribution at its February meeting, and there were 13 organizations that received it. And then a more comprehensive one was the one in Charlestown. Again, a breakdown, a chart of all the different agencies and nonprofits that benefited. Now, my ordinance here actually broadens it, and if you read it, the impact fee would be allowed, if the very last paragraph, section 1, the funds in this community impact linkage fee may be expended by the city upon recommendations from the city manager and a majority vote of the city council, but solely for the creation and maintenance of affordable housing, the support of social services within the city, workforce development, job creation, education, youth recreational activities, and provided they may also appear in the 5-year CIP plan for the city council, public space enhancements, transportation and traffic and transportation improvements in capital construction projects. So if we wanted to, say, mitigate traffic impact of a project itself, it can be used. I made it very broad so that the project itself, or rather the monies, can be used in any which way. But that is basically the gist of it. Again, we did have a meeting earlier last fall on the subject matter and had to reintroduce it as part of the new session. So if there's any questions either to myself or the city manager, I would just welcome them at this point. Councilor Brown, just remember, Ricky's working alone with the sound, so please be sure to speak into the microphone so that everyone can hear you.
So I know it's going to take some time to really get into this, and I've been reading into it. My only question is that right now is if this is implemented, where would this go into our budget? Would we have to set up an agency for the monies to come in, or how would we hold the money? Or?
Good question. And I would say that once, if and when it does pass, because we have to wait for the legislature to pass it, and then we would have to adopt it, that would then trigger, similarly to the CPA, we would then adopt a procedure of how is this done. Like the CPA, recommendations will be made by the city manager, and then the appropriations out of that fund would be coming from the city council. The city council would have to approve the recommendations made by the city manager. But we ourselves, once this passes, can then create the the application process and so forth. I didn't want to get into that without it actually being on the books, but I see it to be similar to the CPA process, except that it won't be the community preservation group that adopts the measures or the applications. It would be the city council. But I'm sure that the city manager and staff will work on helping us draft up an application process and procedure.
Okay, just to follow up, obviously when it goes to the state delegation, the whole delegation is going to see it. Will this somewhat take away from our ability to get money from the state now that they see we have another mechanism in incurring money from developers? 20% is a lot of money. I mean, I don't know how many projects, but if there's a lot of things going on, the state delegation will be able to argue that the city of Chelsea is now creating money that the state does not have to give them. I just want to make sure this doesn't interfere with that.
I think that because mitigation is already happening, they just seem that this is just something that is done transparently and is a process in place. The city of Boston doesn't get more or less money from the state just because it has a linkage fee, neither does Medford. It doesn't play into it. On a local level, mitigation happens between cities and towns and developers. So I can't foresee any state agency looking at the city of Chelsea on any application for mass development works, Chapter 90 or anything like that, and stipulating that, well, since you are getting already a local mitigation fee, we're going to give you less and so forth, because we currently do have mitigation. It's just not a procedure in place, and that's what this would codify the mitigation process in the books and have a procedure, and also give the power to the city council to decide how that mitigation is used.
All right, thank you.
Councilor Recupero.
I only have one question.
Please, speak in a...
Okay,
Thank
I
you.
only have one question. Is this fund specifically for one purpose, or does it have multi-purposes? Is this just for housing, or it can be used for any other funds? For anything? Let's say you need students, or you want to give a homeowner to fix his home. Is this specifically for one purpose?
As I stated earlier, in the second paragraph, I read off that the petition, this could be done, the funds, as I read, the funds in the community linkage fee may be used by the city and recommended by the city manager for the sole creation of either creation or maintenance of affordable housing, the support of social services within the city, workforce development, job creation and education, youth recreational activities, and public space enhancements, traffic and transportation improvements, and capital construction, provided that they are part of the 5-year capital improvement plan. So basically, it can be used for a multitude of things, whether it be for housing, for youth leagues, it could be for the increase of social services amongst our partners, our nonprofit partnerships, or it can be in the CIP.
So would Alex Tram be would he be in charge of this program?
I envision anyone like Alex or even John or whoever not to be in charge of the program, but there would be some sort of management to take in the applications or work with the city manager and how this could be, the monies could be suggested. And then at that point, the city manager would come to us and say, this is what we think, how the money should be spent. Can you approve this, yes or no?
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, I'm going to allow the city manager, I know that he had a couple of comments on this. Again, it was his suggestion of the linkage fee versus over mine. We had some discussions about the pros and cons of each one, but I wanted to provide him an opportunity to speak on it.
Thank you, Mr. President. No, this draft really incorporates the comments that I had back in the fall when this was first before the council, and I think the changes that have been made reflect the concerns that I had, and the end product actually is quite good. I think this is a legitimate way for a city and town to do mitigation when it comes to significant projects in the city. So if this passes, I think we'll have a nice vehicle for generating some funds, and it would operate kind of like it would be just another fund. It would be like a stabilization fund where we have money set aside, and I come to you with ideas for spending it, and it's up to the council to decide by majority vote if that spending would happen, similar to what we do with the stabilization fund, although in this case it would be a pure majority vote. The council president mentioned an application process. You could certainly set something like that up if you wanted to open it up to community groups or residents to petition the city to spend money out of this fund. We don't do that with stabilization, but nothing prevents you from doing that with this kind of fund. So this works for me. I think it's a good thing. I would just say two things. One, on the ordinance, there's just a couple of stylistic changes that we can work on if and when this gets presented for a final vote, which can't happen, as the council president says, until the legislature approves the home rule petition. The home rule petition has one minor typo in it. In the third to last line, it says FIVR year, and it should be 5-year capital improvement plan. And then the final comment I would say is, we do have something in our zoning ordinance that's kind of a poor man's linkage fee, which is the Community Improvement Trust Fund. I would recommend that if and when the legislature approves this, and we are ready to adopt the ordinance to implement it, we ought to, at the same time, eliminate the Community Improvement Trust Fund, because that would then be a double hit on developers and really not fair. So until this gets adopted, we have this Community Improvement Trust Fund, which is not anywhere near as effective as this will be. Once the legislature allows us to do something like this, we will adopt an ordinance like this, and we will at the same time strike the Community Improvement Trust Fund, and every developer will be directed to this language and said, this is the mitigation that you have to pay when you have a project that is that triggers this. And it's a larger project, 25,000 square feet, more than 24 or more units, so it's not for smaller projects, and I think that's a fair way to go about it. So I don't really have anything else to say. I think this works, in my opinion. And I support it, and I will speak for 1 minute at the public hearing to say I support it.
Councilor Brown.
Manager, I just have a few questions for you. Can you tell us since you've been city manager, how many projects have been larger than 24 here? And then turn it around, how many's also been under 24?
Hard to say. I mean, I could think of a few very recent market rate projects. The two that Vino did, 932 Broadway, Chestnut Street, those were both over 24 units. A couple of commercial projects have exceeded 25,000 square feet. Certainly the 22 Willow Street project did, and the upcoming project at 295 Eastern will. So, occasionally, more than occasionally, we get projects that will trigger this mitigation.
Forbes would have done it.
Forbes absolutely would have been
Yeah,
triggered
and we'll
by
do it
this.
if they ever come in. And how many projects have we had in your tenure under 24?
Oh, many, many, many projects
Okay.
are under 24 units, but, you know, that's up to you can set the floor
Right.
anywhere you want, and you don't have to decide that tonight. The beauty of the,
No, I just
well,
want the.
I guess you do, because the home
Yeah.
rule petition does
Yeah.
specifically reference 24, so.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's a policy decision on the council's part, and I don't have a strong opinion, one way or another, as to where that lies. 24 is a perfectly acceptable floor for me. If you wanted to go lower, that would work for me as well.
What about
But that's a
16?
policy decision for the council.
What about 16?
I have the same opinion as I have with 24, fine with me.
Thank you.
The only, city manager reminded me, there were so many drafts going back and forth that when I had sent this to the Fatima to finally introduce it, one of the things that was missing was the paragraph that would have a waiver from this fee. And the reason why I thought that a waiver could play a role, first of all, one of my concerns with this petition is that not all projects are the same. 25,000 square feet, gross square feet, gross area development projects are different and most likely different. And one may have more impact than the other. And that was the beauty of why I wanted to pass my version, because it would have been up to the city manager to negotiate based on a case-by-case instance and then fine-tune it. What I mean by a waiver is this. You could have, for example, the Chelsea Clock development. If it was to be filed today, it would have the inclusionary zoning, and yet we would also charge them a mitigation fee. However, what is unknown to many is that that site was heavily contaminated. And if you take that project or that size project on, say, the Demoulas lot in the back and say, let's build the same amount, Demoulas wouldn't have that contamination. And so the cost of the project was a lot lower. That cost of remediation of cleaning, and you add on the cost of, say, this linkage fee, could make it undoable. And that's why I say, well, if it ever comes to a point, and it would have to be proven, and the city manager and the staff would do the due diligence, if it ever got to the point of saying, no project because of the linkage fee versus we get a nice project with a waiver of the linkage fee, I'd want that ability because, again, there are unforeseeable costs that we may not be aware of. So I wanted the ability to put the waiver in, and if, for example, if it was residential and they did, instead of this linkage fee, they decided to have a higher rate of affordable units in the project, instead of 15%, go to 20 or 25%, then of course, why not waive the linkage fee? But that was something that was forgotten or missed in that numbers of drafts that were sent to Fatima and the additions that were going between the city manager and myself. So that is something I plan to address later on and have that as part of the ordinance and introduced as an amendment, is the ability for the city council to waive the mitigation fee if a project needs it. Councilor Lopez.
Mr. Ambrosino, this is going to apply to only for private developers, or that's going to apply also for non-profit, like neighborhood developers who bought 170 Cottage?
So the home You know, I just haven't looked at the language enough.
I will state this. TND on a normal basis usually does a project that is 100% affordable. In the ordinance that I presented, any project that has a minimum of 25% affordable, because our zoning requires 15%. So if a developer chooses to build something that has 25% affordable or higher, then this impact fee is not included. So as it stands, there is not one project that TND has done based on its high level of affordability that would incur this linkage fee, because all of their projects are nearly 100% affordable. So that is included as one of the conditions of a waiver.
So just to put a finer point on it as I looked at this more closely. So the home rule petition, the only thing you're going to adopt tonight, doesn't have any mention of that. This petition simply gives you the ability to draft an ordinance. The ordinance that has been proposed before you, which you are not going to finally vote on tonight, as the council president stated, does have an express exemption on that first page in paragraph 14-460C that says it doesn't apply to any project where at least 25% of the units are deed restricted. So most of the T&D projects that have been built here would have been exempt from this, as this ordinance is currently drafted. Again, those are decisions you can continue to discuss when the time comes for you to finalize the ordinance itself. Tonight, you're simply voting on the simple home rule petition, which merely gives you the right to draft any kind of ordinance you want on this.
Any other questions, comments? Councilor Robinson.
Can you give us a definition of, when you say most of the stuff is affordable, you know, X amount of units, is that based on the affordable units being a percentage? Say there's like 20 units that might be affordable out of 80 units, so that out of those 20 units would be the breakdown of what the affordability would be, not the whole project.
I'm not sure I understand your question.
So in the development, you said that the units would be 100% affordable. So what is that 100% based on? So if there's 15% that are earmarked to be affordable, is that what we're going to count on, or we're going to count the overall numbers of the project?
As I read the ordinance as drafted, you would only be exempt from its provisions, at least as currently proposed, if 25% of your units met the definition of affordable, the HUD definition of affordable. So that's 80% or lower of AMI. 25% would have to do that in order to be exempt from this linkage fee.
Okay, that's my answer.
So, yeah, so 25% of the units on anything greater than 24 would have to be at 80% or lower to get waived from linkage fee.
Correct.
And again, if, for example, we pass a waiver of the linkage fee and someone presented a plan of affordability that had a different scenario, and one could argue, and we look at a project and say, I am going to build 10 units, or let's say a number, 30 units, 10 are going to be at 80%, 10 are going to be at 100%, 10 are going to be at 120. And the developer said, look, I'm not charging market rates. These are all affordable, and I have 100%, but it's not definition by 80%. Can I get a waiver? Again, that's a possibility, but we don't have the ability to foresee what the project could or could not be. But Councilor Taylor.
So
correct me if I'm wrong, but this kind of sounds like that this is a way to go from the 15% inclusionary to a 20% to get people to avoid the linkage fee. Is that what I'm understanding?
Well, they don't have to.
Of course they don't have to, but that's the incentive, and that's...
Well, I think the idea is that the linkage fee is going to be collected, but if they prefer to create affordable housing and not have the city then spend the linkage fee on affordable housing, it's a give and take.
But then if you're exempting nonprofits from this fee, you're pushing everything over into affordable. You're gonna get a much larger percentage of affordable, right?
Correct.
Okay, so this sounds like, so what is the point then of the inclusionary zoning? If it's for units that are from 10 to 24?
The inclusionary.
Because in essence, that is what you will get.
Inclusionary zoning already occurs in any unit above 10.
So under this...
So between 10 units and 24 units, you don't have to worry about it because you're already going to be mandated at 15%.
No, I understand. What I'm saying is that the inclusionary zoning, if this were to pass, would generally be only, in essence, for units of 10 to 23 units. You're going to get, and I mean, it wouldn't have to be that, but in order to avoid the linkage fee, what's the difference in another 5%? I guess is what I'm saying. So you're incentivizing the developer to add another 5% affordable housing units to avoid the linkage fee.
There's some incentive here for a developer who's building 24 or more units to increase the affordability if he or she wishes to avoid this linkage fee, but it's up to the developer to decide.
Of course it's up to the developer, but that's not the point. The point is about this proposal kind of, in essence, providing enough incentive for the people to add on another 5% of their units to be affordable. Thus, basically...
Oh, another 10%, because right now your affordable threshold is
15.
Is 15.
Yeah.
But, pardon me, 10%, pardon
Yes,
me.
but could I just stop you once? I want to make sure you understand this.
Yeah.
You're not deciding this tonight.
No, I understand.
These are policy decisions that you, as a council, can hash out over the course of the next 6 months to a year. Let's be honest. It's going to take the legislature a year to pass this home rule petition. You have a lot of time to hash out this policy decision as to whether you want to exempt.
But isn't this the forum to get those questions out on the table?
Not necessarily, because all you have to decide tonight is whether or not you want to have the ability to pass a linkage fee ordinance.
I understand.
The details of that ordinance are left to another day.
I understand, but the willingness of this body to pass a home rule petition, knowing what's coming, it should have some effect on our decision.
But you can change this ordinance.
I understand that nothing's set in stone at this time.
Right.
But if this is what the proposed, I just...
I mean,
Councilor Taylor, I have to ask, Councilor Taylor, I'm trying to get, what is the concern here? Are you concerned that we're forcing a developer to include more affordable housing?
No, I think that, I guess what I'm trying to do is there's no particular concern, only that people, both on this council and the people watching, are understanding kind of what is going on here. That's all. So what it is we're talking about, and this is, I believe, what this will do. My apologies, it wasn't 20, 25%. So it would be an extra 10% of the units being affordable housing.
And so, yes, but again, you don't have to decide that policy, because your decision to ask the legislature to give you the ability to craft an ordinance doesn't bind you to any particular ordinance. The one decision you really do have to make tonight is whether you want the trigger on a residential development for any linkage fee to be 24 units, because in this proposal, that is built into the home rule petition. And if the legislature adopts that, you will have no wiggle room there. So you could decide to leave that blank, just talk about residential projects, and save for another day the particular trigger number of units. I just bring that to your attention, that once you vote tonight on the home rule petition, that is one thing that you will be bound. But you certainly won't be bound on just carving out exceptions to the ordinance. You could decide no one's getting an exception from this ordinance. We're not exempting any nonprofit, we're not exempting any private developer. We're just gonna have this apply to everyone that meets its conditions.
Thank you.
I just want to state, as far as the discussion on the 24, the reason why I use 24 is my familiarity with cost of construction and developments that are happening in Chelsea. And I know using that background and familiarity with construction costs and market rates and what they sell for, that at 24 units, you are already providing four affordable units. And that cost tends to already bring the project to a very tight line, I want to say, of viability. And so I wanted the trigger point only to be above 24. I also want to stipulate that, or bring the attention to my colleagues, that we're talking that if a project is about 30 units and let's say 35,000 square feet, the linkage fee is a small number. I would think that they would much rather pay that very small number in the linkage fee than increase and get a waiver, because the sales would be much more lucrative staying at 15% and paying the linkage fee than to go up another 10% in affordability rates, because again, the markup. So that's the take. Councilor Taylor.
So let me just follow that. But we don't know what it's going to be, because we haven't drafted those linkage fees yet, correct?
I'm talking about the linkage fee is in here, or what it was said earlier. The linkage fee rate was set in the ordinance, not
in the ordinance, but we haven't
not
passed
in the home rule
ordinance.
petition, but there was a linkage fee rate presented in the ordinance, because I asked the city manager to provide some numbers of what the rates were according to area, and he provided a number. And if I look at the linkage fees, we had a gross number of, on page 3, is the fee shall be determined by multiplying the rate of $12.50 per square foot, and the square foot over 25,000. And that was one for mixed-use buildings. The rate of $10 was lower. So the commercial was a little higher, and mixed-use was $10. So that's the ordinance on, that's the draft of the ordinance that we'll be laying on the table. Yes, so...
Okay. But this was just a draft of a potentially proposed ordinance.
Correct.
This has nothing to do with what we're doing tonight. This
No.
is only to be used to
I
demonstrate
introduced
what
it.
you wanted to do.
Correct. I
Okay.
used it. This is something, again, the city manager and I were working back and forth on how the money was spent, what are the trigger points, and the rate. Is it finalized? No, but that was what we suggested at the moment. So you can read this and you can see what the rates actually are right now. If anyone wants to make an amendment 6 months, 12 months from now, have at it, but you have the grounds or the paragraph for it.
But this still has to be proposed. This is not, there's nothing official about this. This is only what you and the city manager have put together.
Correct. It was proposed, it was read, and we're going to lay it on the table because we still have to wait for the legislature to pass the home rule petition. They accompanied each other. They were introduced together.
But
Introduced together.
There's opportunity for amending in any way. I don't think the council really hasn't spent a lot of time thinking about this ordinance because it's a little bit premature at the moment.
Right.
It will require some real thought and policy discussion before it gets adopted.
Councilor Robinson.
I don't know if Councilor Taylor was trying to get where my thinking is. So if I'm a developer and I come in here and I say, I'm gonna do more affordable units, but I wanna do it at the 60 and 80%, what effect does that have on our inclusionary zoning by the numbers?
You want to, if you want, I don't understand, number of units. First, tell me, how many units are you looking to build?
Say 15 units.
15 units,
Yeah.
okay. And it, number one, it doesn't apply because it's below the trigger point.
Right, but in inclusionary zoning,
The inclusionary zoning would require at least 15% anyway.
Right, so that's my thing, is that if I come in, I want to do affordable units at a higher percentage, what about the low end of our inclusionary zoning piece? That won't, the 30, right, the 30 and 50.
It's not
That's
gonna
on
have-
rentals.
It's not going to have any impact on that. It
Yeah.
will, you'll still, whatever affordable units you propose, still have to be subject to our affordability requirement, which is sort of an equal distribution among those 30, 50, 80.
Yeah, no, I wanted to be clear on that before I sign up.
Councilor Recupero. Please speak into the microphone.
So the question, I have a simple question. So, by the people wanting to, do 20 units, and you're telling them, if you build more affordable units, you're gonna have to pay less, right? If you build less affordable units, you're gonna pay more? So it all depends. Let's say a developer comes in and says, I know we did it before, like One North was like that. They come in and say, well, now we don't wanna build no affordable units at all. So, I know over here you haven't set the rate, what they're gonna charge, but you said it before, and the other one it was set. So if they decide they don't wanna put no affordable units at all, what happens then? They have to pay us nothing?
Yeah, everyone's required to build affordable units here as long as they build more than 10 more units or more.
But
It's-
One North was required to put affordable units, but they paid, and they didn't put any affordable units.
That
I
is not-
remember.
that-
That was
is not
before we
true.
had an ordinance. We now have an ordinance that would have required them to build affordable
So
units.
by, like Councilor Taylor says, so by us adopting this, right, it requires them to put that percentage? Let's say they want to put 2%.
No, you're adopting the home rule petition tonight really has no impact whatsoever on affordability. Your adoption of the home rule petition tonight merely gives the city the right, the legal right, assuming the legislature approves it, to apply a linkage fee to developers.
Okay, so-
Right now, we do this informally. Every big developer comes before the city, and we negotiate with them, and they voluntarily agree to certain payments and certain considerations to the city. It's a give and take, a back and forth. I think what the council president wanted to do, which is a reasonable position, is say that leaves too much discretion to city managers, and it opens the door for, inequitable treatment among developers. and it does. I mean, because you're sort of, every developer comes in, and it's kind of a give and take, and one developer could say, gee, I walked out of special permit, and I had to give all this stuff up. I made a donation to this one. I gave money to fix the street, whatever the case is. And another developer says, I didn't do any of that. I got my special permit, and there was nothing there. This basically, every developer that works in the door will be subject to the same thing. We say, here's our ordinance, this is the mitigation you need to pay.
So what the council president is doing is a good thing. He's trying to make it equal and fair for all.
I think as we've negotiated over the course of the last 6 months, we've come up with a proposal that I think is fair to everyone. It's one that the council president seems supportive of, and I am supportive of.
Well, that's good. So from what I gather that you're saying here, there should be no problem with us voting this in.
All I'm looking for you to do tonight is send to the legislature a petition that would allow us to consider a linkage fee ordinance. The details of that ordinance, we can leave for another day, and it'll be up to this council to do. And given that it's an ordinance, future councilors can make all sorts of changes that they want, because it'll be an ordinance within our control here locally. What we're asking the legislature to do is, please give us the legal authority to do this, because right now that legal authority really doesn't.
This is a good thing. Yeah. I'm in favor of something what the city.
The one thing I want you to be clear of is the way this particular.
It's not going to be the way it's going to be done. This is just a rough
Except
draft.
there is one piece in here that is going to tie your hands a bit, and that is the trigger for residential units is set in this proposal as before you at 24. As I said, I don't have a strong opinion on that. That's up to the council.
Okay. I understand. That's
Any
good.
questions on this side? Comments? Councilor Brown?
Thank you, Mr. President.
We got 5 minutes, by the way, then we got to wrap up.
I'll just be very quickly. Just, again, we are voting tonight to just have the a piece of order go forward. I know a lot of languages here, but we still have the control of the language, what I understand. I mean, if not, I'd like for someone to speak now, whether it be the city solicitor or the city manager, regarding once it's sent forward, is it set in stone? I believe that we can still come back and change the numbers, whether it's from 24 to 22 or 16 or 18 or whatever you have.
You won't be able to do
Not the
that
24.
after tonight.
The only number we can't change is 24 is tonight because it's in the home rule petition.
So we could vote tonight to change the number?
If you want to change the 24 number, it would have to be tonight as an amendment.
Okay, so changes would have to be tonight. That's all.
If anyone wants to change it. Seeing no other questions and that we're 5 minutes away from 10 minutes away rather from our next regularly scheduled meeting, I will close this portion and we will move on to our next meeting. Thank you.